The surface of this iceberg should be familiar to many, the subjects that almost everyone associates with Islam. Beneath them, however, lie increasingly obscure, complicated, and often controversial questions of Islamic history, law, and belief. Some people have shared this chart with me, which has been making the rounds as of late, and I thought it would give me a good opportunity to discuss not only obscure Islamic topics, but also some of the foundational ideas that form the baseline of our religion and are often misunderstood. So that's where I'll start, at the very top of the iceberg with some of the most basic entries, whilst trying to add in some lesser-known information wherever possible. Before we start, just a note about my approach. This channel is not a secular academic channel, although I study Islam both secularly and academically. I am a Sunni Muslim, and I have my own convictions regarding these topics. However, I will still try to represent the different schools and sects fairly, including positions I do not personally accept. And lastly, this is a different kind of video from the ones I normally make, so if you enjoy this, let me know, because I may continue this as a series covering more of the iceberg. Liking and subscribing always helps, of course. With that said, let us begin. Entry number 1. Tawhid. Tawhid is the most fundamental doctrine in Islam, the staunch belief in the oneness of God. Every Muslim must adhere and bear witness to this belief through the Shahada confession, which has its leading phrase as La ilaha illallah. There is no God but God. This topic may be construed in many ways, and its different interpretations are given entries further down on the iceberg, since it was defined differently by different sects and theological schools. Yet no matter what, for any Islamic denomination, it serves as the baseline for all theology. Entry number 2. The 5 pillars of practice and the 6 pillars of faith. Concerning these, I will address the Sunni conception first, since that is what the entry refers to. Twelver Shiites and Ismailis have similar alternatives to these categories, which I shall cover after this. The 5 pillars are the 5 primary sacramental practices carried out in Sunni Islam, necessary for salvation. These are, in order of importance, the Shahada, bearing witness to the oneness of God, Salah, observance of the daily prayers, Zakat, paying of an organized alms tax set aside for the needy, Sawm, observing the fast, particularly that of Ramadan, and the Hajj, which is the pilgrimage to the Kaaba, that is the house of God in Mecca. Now, the 6 pillars of faith, or Iman, are the 6 fundamental doctrines to Sunni Muslims. They are 1. Belief in God and His oneness and power and worship. 2. Belief in the angels. 3. Belief in the holy books, aside from the Quran that includes the Torah, the Psalms, the Gospel, among others. 4. Belief in the prophets. 5. Belief in the Day of Judgment. And 6. Belief in the Qadr, which is the divine decree. This last one has its own entry, which we may cover in another video, as discussion surrounding it can delve into the realm of complicated theology. On the other hand, Twelver Shiites have the 10 branches and 5 roots of faith, and Ismaili Shiites have 7 pillars, adding 2 onto the Sunni 5, being Tahara, which is spiritual purity, and Jihad, striving against the ego and base desires in particular. Entry number 3. Sharia. Sharia is the divinely ordained way of life and law of Islam. It encompasses all aspects of Islamic life, from worship, ethics, family life, commerce, and the social duties of every individual Muslim. The word literally translates to a path to water. The Sharia is derived from the scriptures, that is, the Quran and the Hadith literature, and is laid down by the scholars, the ulama, through a science called fiqh, which is the fallible human effort to interpret and apply the Sharia. Thus, there is some disagreement between jurists on various aspects of the law. Its reduction to state punishments is a modern oversimplification. Entry number 4. Ummah. Ummah is the term for a nation or community in Arabic, which most commonly refers to the wider Muslim community, that is the community of the Prophet Muhammad, though it can be used in conjunction with another prophet such as Moses' Ummah or Jesus' Ummah to refer to their specific nation, that is respectively the Jews or the Christians. It is similar to the term church in Christianity when it is used to refer to the believers as a whole. Entry number 5, al-Kitab. Al-Kitab, or the people of the book, refers to the group of non-Muslims legally distinguished from others in the Quran, that being Jews, Christians, and Sabians, for their reception of a revealed tradition prior to Islam. While only these three are mentioned directly, the distinction has at times been expanded by jurists to include other religions such as Zoroastrianism. Under Islamic law, those called the people of the book receive a covenant of protection and are called dhimmis. They retained freedom of worship and a degree of communal self-government, that is, rule by the laws of their own book, so the Jews would rule by the Torah and the Christians would rule however they wished through the law of the church, although they were not legally equal to Muslims. In return for military protection, as non-Muslims could not serve in the army themselves, the dhimmis had to pay a tax called the Jizya, which we will talk about now. Entry number 6, Jizya. The Jizya is a tax levied by Muslim governments upon their non-Muslim subjects, called Ahl al-Dhimma, or the dhimmis. It was paid in exchange for state protection and exemption from military service. The lucrative nature of this tax helped to implicitly discourage forced conversion campaigns, since they would rob the state of a large taxable base. And a quick note, although forced conversion is forbidden in Islam, forcing the unity of the population serves a political purpose, exactly why Charlemagne did forced conversion during the Saxon Wars, for example. So the impact of the jizya in this regard should not be ignored. Entry number 7, the Madhahib and the 4 Sunni Imams. The Madhahib, singular madhhab, are the schools or interpretive traditions of Islamic law, which is known as fiqh. Traditionally, the 4 mainstream Sunni schools are the Maliki, Shafi'i, Hanbali, and Hanafi schools. Each of these juristic schools was named after their eponymous founder, Imam Malik bin Anas for the Malikis, Imam Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shafi'i for the Shafi'is, Ahmad ibn Hanbal for the Hanbalis, and Abu Hanifa for the Hanafis, respectively. Despite this, as regards the Sunni schools, each one is not exhausted by the opinions of its foundational imam. Rather, each is based loosely on the usul, or the methodology of that imam. Thus, each juristic school has an incredibly detailed, cumulative tradition whose doctrines and methods were transmitted, systematized, and refined by generations of jurists. These madhahib are not to be mistaken as separate sects, although some of them were treated as such during certain periods of Islamic history. Their primary differences can be found in their interpretation and application of the Islamic law, which is the Sharia, which we spoke about earlier. Nevertheless, legal and theological affiliation were historically interconnected. For instance, the early Hanafi school was theologically diverse. One Hanafi theological tradition that developed in eastern Iran and Transoxania was later systematized as the theological school called Maturidism, while an influential school of Hanafis in Iraq adopted Mu'tazili theology, which was deemed heretical by many contemporary Sunnis, and it has its own entry further down the iceberg. The former school, closer in doctrine to the rest of the Sunnis, eventually prevailed. The Shafi'i and Maliki schools of law would come to be associated with the Ash'ari school of theology, and the Hanbali school with the Athari tradition, which is more literalist, although these theological lines were not so firmly drawn. And there really is no need to concern yourself with the different beliefs of each of these schools at this point. We'll talk about that later. The Hanafi school, named after the Kufan jurist Abu Hanifa, developed from the Ahlul Ra'i tradition, which means the people of opinion, whereas the Maliki, Shafi'i, and Hanbali traditions were associated with the Ahlul Hadith, the people of Hadith. The Hadith being the various extra Quranic narrations attributed to the Prophet, which are a crucial source of Islamic law. The Hanafi school developed from the Ahlul Ra'i tradition, the people of opinion, whereas the Maliki, Shafi'i, and Hanbali traditions were associated with the Ahlul Hadith, the people of Hadith. Hadith, of course, being the various extra-Quranic narrations attributed to the Prophet, which are a crucial source of Islamic law. And that isn't to say that Ahlul Ra'i did not make use of the Hadith, only that they did not put as much emphasis on it as Ahlul Hadith. Abu Hanifa and his followers initially endured intense criticism and even accusations of heresy for their legal and theological doctrines at the hands of some of their Sunni contemporaries. However, the Hanafi school was eventually recognized as one of the 4 acceptable schools of Sunni law after significant development in doctrine and certain political circumstances led them to greater conformity with Ahlul Hadith, at least ostensibly. Orthodox Islamic legal theory holds that these schools must be followed through the practice of taqlid, which means deference to a qualified legal authority. According to the most qualified jurists of every madhhab, taqlid is a rational necessity for the layman. Just as one may trust a doctor for medical advice, a layman is to defer matters of the law to the scholars thereof, and not his own interpretation. Classical Sunni orthodoxy holds that only qualified jurists may perform ijtihad, which means individual interpretation of the scriptures. Meanwhile, the lay people are obliged to adhere to the rulings of those qualified jurists. The modernist heterodox conception that every Muslim should independently derive legal rulings departs from the classical consensus of the Sunni religion. The practice of picking and choosing rulings from various, albeit legitimate, madhahib also falls under this heterodoxy for the same reason. The Shafi'i scholar An-Nawawi records the following opinion in accordance with the wider Shafi'i school, quote, "If it were permissible to follow whichever legal school one wished from issue to issue, this would lead a person to pick and choose the concessions of the various schools, following his own desires. He would choose between permissibility and prohibition, obligation and mere allowance, and this would lead to the dissolution of the bonds of religious obligation." And further, the eponymous founder of the Maliki school, Malik, says, quote, "The common people are obligated to follow the eminent jurists, that is, the mujtahids, in legal rulings." And the Hanafi scholar Ibn Nujaym says, quote, "The layperson is obligated to follow a scholar whose fatwa is relied upon." And the Hanbali scholar Ibn Qudama says, quote, "Taqlid, that is, legal deference, in subsidiary legal rulings is permissible by consensus. Indeed, it is obligatory for the layperson." Now, all that isn't to say that one is stuck adhering to one madhhab his entire life, but only that he is not to shop for various rulings when each madhhab has different usul, methodology, and may thus lead to contradictions in doctrine. Consistency is key here. There have been other schools of thought throughout Islamic history as well, but they have a separate entry further down the chart. Entry number 8, the Salaf. The word Salaf means predecessors and refers to the pious predecessors in particular, the Salaf as-Salih in Sunni Islam, being the first 3 generations of Muslims, the companions of the Prophet and the 2 after that. They are considered the spiritual golden standard for all Sunni Muslims. Every Sunni will claim to follow them and their teachings. This is unrelated to the modern reformist sect who calls themselves Salafis in a bid to monopolize the legacy of the Salaf for themselves. Entry number 9. Prophets are sinless. Now, this is a rather dense theological subject, but I thought it was pertinent to include here in the basic entries, so here we are. Islam teaches the isma of the prophets, that is, that they are safeguarded from errors that would jeopardize their message. Muslims all agree that this means that, at the very least, prophets cannot knowingly lie about God, or fall into unbelief, or persist in conduct that would otherwise destroy their credibility. Sunni scholars have argued over the extent of this protection, with some saying that there was rational possibility for minor sins or instances of mistaken judgment, and others denying outright that the prophets could commit any sin at all. This latter view is more common. As for the Shiites, they concur that all prophets are unable to commit any sin, either minor or major. Nevertheless, the Quran reproaches Adam, Moses, Jonah, and Muhammad, but these instances are often considered minor mistakes in judgment, accidents, or incidents of human forgetfulness which carry no sin by the latter group. It should also be understood that this matter depends on one's definition of sin, which is different in Islam than it is in, say, Christianity. For instance, according to this latter group who maintains the absolute sinlessness of the prophets, in the garden it is considered that Eve sinned and not Adam, with the Quran saying Adam only forgot his covenant with God, and the Hadith literature making clear that Eve betrayed Adam knowingly. Entry number 10. 124,000 prophets. This number comes from a long hadith relating a conversation between the Prophet Muhammad and his companion Abu Dhar, where Abu Dhar asks the Prophet how many prophets there were throughout history, and Muhammad replies that there were 124,000. Although this number is widely accepted by several scholars and repeated by lay people, the authenticity of the narration, specifically the number, is up for debate. Yet given that it is authentic, the vast number of prophets mentioned has led many people to suggest that several virtuous figures throughout history may have been prophets themselves, the most popular examples of which being Zoroaster and the Buddha. Entry number 11. Nabi al-Ummi. Nabi al-Ummi is commonly translated as the unlettered prophet. The entry refers to the prevailing view among Muslims that the Prophet Muhammad was illiterate, stemming from verse 157 of Surah al-A'raf. Despite the term's implied meaning, the actual etymology comes from the Arabic word for mother and refers to a person being in the same state as they were when they were born. It may also carry the meaning of someone who is unfamiliar with scripture or a Gentile. This slight ambiguity has allowed some groups, such as the Shiites and some Hanafis, to reject the idea that the Prophet was illiterate at all. One such argument is that Mecca is called al-Qura, the mother of cities, and therefore Ummi refers to his being from Mecca. Entry number 12. Sirah. Sirah here refers to a specific genre of hagiographic literature, detailing the life of the Prophet in elevated or religiously fulfilling terms. These are not just historical documents, but devotional literature read by Muslims to gain a love for and devotion towards the Prophet. They include stories of miracles, etc., which secular history would reject. However, these sources are still important for secular historians trying to piece together a picture of the Prophet's life. The most influential early Sunni Sirah is that of Ibn Ishaq, written in the 8th century, which, although is not extant in its original state, is preserved through scholars like at-Tabari and Ibn Hisham, two eminent scholars in their own right, post-dating Ibn Ishaq by just over a century. The most influential work of Sirah for the Twelver Muslims is Hayat al-Qulub, compiled by Muhammad al-Majlisi in the 17th century. However, there is another genre associated with the lives of the 12 Imams, which is also popular among Twelvers. That's seen in books like Kitab al-Irshad, written in the 11th century by al-Mufid. Entry number 13. The Sahaba. This refers to the companions and disciples of the Prophet who saw or met him during their lives. These individuals play an extremely important role in the narration of hadith, the governance of the nascent Islamic state, and battles under Muslim commanders, who themselves were companions. The testimonies of the Sahaba, involving the lifestyle of Muhammad as it was passed down through trusted narrators, became the framework for developing the tradition of Islam, that is, the Sunnah. Attempting to define who exactly is included among the Sahaba, the Sunni scholar Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani says, quote, "The soundest definition I have encountered is that a companion is one who met the Prophet while believing in him and died upon Islam. This includes those whose association with him was long or short, those who narrated from him and those who did not, those who campaigned with him and those who did not, those who merely saw him without sitting with him, and those who did not see him because of an impediment such as blindness." Entry number 14. The Quraysh. The Quraysh were the dominant, wealthy merchant tribe of Mecca, where Muhammad and his family hailed from. They controlled the holy site of the Kaaba and the trade routes surrounding the city. Members of this family constituted the holy aristocracy of the early Islamic period. Only members of this family were eligible to hold the title of caliph. Some groups, like the Khawarij, rejected this aristocracy entirely, and there will be a separate entry on the Khawarij later on. Entry number 15. The Hijra. The Hijra refers to the relocation of Muhammad and his early followers from Mecca to the city of Yathrib, later renamed to Madinat an-Nabi, or Medina, in 622 AD. This relocation was prompted by escalating persecution under the pagan authorities of the Quraysh, which included an assassination plot against the Prophet himself. Muhammad was invited to Yathrib as a neutral outsider to arbitrate for the constant blood feuds surrounding the city. He was able to establish relative stability and prosperity within the often war-torn city. It was for this reason that the famous Constitution of Medina was drafted. This has its own entry on the second tier. The Hijra marks the point at which Islam went from a persecuted minority religion into an established self-governing Ummah. It also marks a categorical and thematic split in the Quran, with the Medinan surahs, those revealed after the Hijra, dealing far more with legislation and justice than the previous revealed Meccan surahs. It also marks the very first year of the Islamic lunar calendar, the Hijri calendar, which is denoted by the abbreviation AH, or Anno Hegerai in Latin, the year of the Hijra. The year 2026 is 14/8 in the Hijri calendar. Entry number 16, Qiblah changed. The Qiblah is the direction which Muslims must face during prayer, which, though today is towards Mecca, was initially towards Jerusalem during the advent of Islam, before this was abrogated in Surah al-Baqarah to test the faith of the believers and to emphasize the superiority of Mecca over all previous Abrahamic holy sites in Islam. Entry number 17, al-Kaaba. The Kaaba is the cube-shaped stone structure located at the center of the sacred mosque in Mecca. Indeed, Kaaba means cube. It is known for its signature black drape, although that has changed throughout history, and it is the holiest site in Islam. It is the site of the current Qiblah, the focal point where every Muslim must face during prayer. One of the rituals concerning the Kaaba is the tawaf, or circumambulation around it, which is a common sight during the Hajj and Umrah rituals. Islamic tradition holds that it was originally built by Adam, then rebuilt by Abraham with help from his firstborn son Ishmael, as the analogical house of God. After many centuries, its monotheistic origins were mostly lost, as idolatry had taken hold of the Arabs and the holy precinct was filled with idols. Despite this, when it was threatened and besieged under the Ethiopian commander Abraha, God still protected it through an army of birds carrying pebbles, which pushed back against the incurring army. This is the story as told in Surah Al-Fil of the Quran. After the conquest of Mecca under Muhammad, these idols were destroyed, and the status of the Kaaba as a monotheistic house of worship was restored. The inside of the cubic structure is empty, but it is mentioned in some reports that it once contained icons of Jesus and his mother Mary, which Muhammad, according to Ibn Ishaq, Ibn Hisham, al-Azraqi, and others, refused to have destroyed like the idols outside. Quote, "The apostle ordered that the pictures should be erased except those of Jesus and Mary," end quote. Entry number 18, the Black Stone. The Black Stone is a sacred rock embedded into the eastern corner of the Kaaba in Mecca. According to tradition, it descended from paradise as a strikingly white stone that became black over time by absorbing the sins of mankind. For Sunnis, it has a mostly symbolic significance, representing God's right hand on earth, according to some narrations. It does also at times, for both Sunnis and Shiites, carry a metaphysical significance as the witness of God's covenant with mankind. Some narrations indicate that on the Day of Judgment the stone will gain eyes and a mouth to testify on behalf of those who kissed it with true faith. Both groups, that is Sunnis and Shiites, kiss it as a commonplace facet of the Hajj ritual. Entry number 19, Zamzam. Zamzam is a well located within the mosque complex in Mecca, and it is considered to yield holy water. Islamic tradition states that the well was opened up by God as a form of divine intervention to assist Hagar, the second wife of Abraham and the mother of Ishmael, who were both left alone in the desert and were suffering severely from thirst. Some variants of the story suggest that the archangel Gabriel was sent down by God to open up the well, and some suggest that the well was opened due to the infant Ishmael scraping the ground with his feet, causing the well to erupt. The well was rediscovered by Abdul Muttalib, the grandfather of the Prophet Muhammad, when he reportedly had a divine precognition about the well at some point in his life. The well is used to this day and is considered sacred. It reportedly has a unique taste and healing properties, however the latter cannot be scientifically confirmed, of course. Entry number 20. Islam copied pagan rituals. This entry is probably referring principally to the Hajj rituals, that is the pilgrimage to Mecca and the circumambulation of the Kaaba, which we spoke about earlier. And these were practiced by pre-Islamic Arabs and continued, though altered, under Islam. Now, Islam doesn't deny the continuity here, since the pagan Arabs represent to Muslims a degenerated appropriation of Abraham's original religion. The Kaaba was originally established by Abraham for monotheistic worship, according to the Islamic tradition. Muhammad's restoration of the sanctuary then can be compared to the biblical reformers of Jerusalem, purifying the temple of idols after kings had raised foreign altars and idols therein. Only the Arabs were not sent as many prophets as the Jews were. One may interpret this within an Islamic history of revelation. Since the sons of Israel were at one time God's chosen and the primary heir to Abraham was Isaac, it was only after the Jews had rejected their prophets and the Christ, and the Christian law had been irreparably altered from an Islamic perspective, that God moved to the second in line of Abraham, Ishmael, and establish a final prophet among his nation. Entry number 21. Eids. Eid is an Arabic term that can translate to festival or celebration. In Sunni Islam, it refers to two main annual holidays, Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha. Eid al-Fitr falls on the first day of the Islamic month of Shawwal, and it was established by God as a celebration of the completion of the month of Ramadan. It typically involves a unique congregational prayer, charity, family gatherings, and the exchanging of gifts. Eid al-Adha falls on the 10th of Dhul Hijjah and was founded to commemorate the willingness of Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac, who was also willing to go along with it. Celebration involves a congregational prayer, much like Eid al-Fitr, the sacrifice of an animal, which is unique to this Eid, and the sharing of food with those in need. Twelver Shiites have three additional Eids, Eid al-Ghadir, which falls on the 18th of Dhul Hijjah and marks the event of Ghadir Khum, the day on which the Prophet, according to Shiites, had proclaimed Ali to be his successor. There is a separate entry for Ghadir Khum itself, and we may get to that if this video does well enough to justify turning this into a series. The second Eid practiced exclusively by the Shiites is Eid al-Mubahila, which falls on the 21st or 24th of Dhul Hijjah, and it marks the event of the Mubahila, an event where the Prophet and his family met with Christians to debate in Yemen. And lastly is Eid al-Zahra, perhaps the most controversial of these additional Eids. It's observed on the 9th of Rabi' al-Awwal in some Shiite traditions. It is associated with either the death of Umar ibn al-Khattab, the second Rashidun Caliph, or sometimes Umar ibn Sa'd, the general who initially led the army against al-Hussein in the Battle of Karbala. If it is taken to be celebrating the death of Umar ibn al-Khattab, the controversy becomes clear, since Sunnis revere Umar as the second greatest companion of the Prophet after Abu Bakr. However, due to its controversial nature, several Twelver Shiites do not commemorate this occasion, at least in its traditional form. That will be the final entry we will be covering today, and it serves as a good example for just why this iceberg is helpful. Even something as familiar as Eid may open up into a larger historical and doctrinal discussion. These were, of course, mostly foundational subjects in our religion, but if you would like me to turn this into a series showing any kind of support and commenting your thoughts would be appreciated. I will link the original Reddit post in the description so people can see just how obscure the entries become near the bottom. Thank you once again for watching. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم.